Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M. Pierce. This is a Ukraine war news update, second part thereof for the 29th of November 2024. I'm going to start just by adding on to the previous hits and losses video. There was a claim that something exploded in Tuapse. There was fire and smoke there. Tuapse is a place where the Ukrainians had hit an oil refinery, I think, a number of times. But it's a port. It's on the coast of the Black Sea, and here smoke in the port of Tuapse after explosions and media reports that a ship may have been hit. Crimean Wind Telegram channel publishes satellite footage that shows a 135-meter long ship in the port of Tuapse. It could be a large landing ship. This corresponds to the class of Russian warships VDK, including the 11711 Ivan Gren. There is only one such VDK in the Black Sea today. The AFU General Staff also reports that the Ukrainian Defense Forces hit the Atlas oil depot in Rostov and destroyed a radar station of the Buk M3 SAM in occupied Zaporizhia. So that's interesting. It may or may not be a ship, something that looks rather like that was hit. Fingers crossed for the Ukrainians, but also worth noting that the explosion in Crimea is claimed to have been an S-400. So that's in Vitino. Some people claiming that it was an S-400 that was hit there. That's just on the western coast of Crimea, which is a likely positioning for an S-400. It stops. It's got a good visuals out over, good radar capability over the flat sea here, and it can spot any incoming threats quite easily. So we've seen a number of these sorts of installments hit in Cape Tarkankut and all over this kind of general area. So it would fit in with previous strikes being on radars and S-400, S-300 systems in the area. Anyway, moving on to military aid. We're going to start with Norway. The context of this is that Norway is a great supporter of Ukraine, one. Two, it's made a shed load of money out of the Ukraine war because the price of oil went up and they are drilling loads in the North Sea. And so they're making more money. That then fills into their national wealth fund that underwrites. At the moment, their national wealth fund is paying for huge amounts of their government, essentially. I mean, it's such an insanely sensible thing for them to have done, where the British, like I've said before, when we found oil in the North Sea, we were like, oh, no, you go for it, BP, Shell. You go and drill. We'll tax you. But free market, we don't want the government getting involved. Oh no, we are neoliberal, we believe in free market enterprise, and the simple fact of the matter is that Norway didn't do that, and they're much better off as a result. So the Norwegians said, we own this oil as a nation. This is part of our sovereign territory, so therefore anything that you drill out there and make money out of that is actually making money out of Norway. And so we want some of that back, and that will help pay for our pensions. Anyway, it doesn't just pay for their pensions now, it pays for an awful lot by the sounds of it. Anyway, that's the context. So then the Norwegian opposition party, Conservative opposition party, said to Støre, the Prime Minister, and the Norwegian Parliament, hey, look, we think we can treble the amount of money that we are spending on Ukraine to support Ukraine. And so the ruling, I think, left-wing government, is it the Labour government in Norway, have said, okay, well, we'll definitely increase it. And then there was news that they were going to double it, but actually they've now gone over the doubling. So Norway has approved $3.2 billion in aid to Ukraine in 2025. Norwegian Parliament increased support to $3.16 billion, up from the initially proposed $1.36 billion. So the $1.36 was what they were going to spend in the year. Then the government said, actually, we're going to make it 2.75, which was doubling it. And now they've over doubled it from 1.36 actually to 3.16. And that is after calls from the opposition to boost assistance. So the opposition has done a really good job there of getting the ruling government to put their hands in their pocket and actually come up with the goods. This is really good. Now, that's, 3.2 billion is not the 61 billion that the US provide. Norway is a much smaller country. in population and in GDP, but they are doing absolutely the right thing here. They're spending more by a considerable margin. It's up to other European nations to also do that, other supporting nations, given that the US might well pull back, although there are lots of claims about what the US may or may not do. I don't know if it's worth looking at. I was going to leave this for the geopolitical video, but I think it's pertinent here. So this is David D, who is very pro-Republican, so he's going to be looking for the positives of the new Trump regime. He says JD Vance has just deleted all his anti-Ukraine posts from reports. Actually, the reality is he's changed his Twitter handle, probably now that he is vice president. And so that's where all his anti-Ukraine tweets have gone. But we haven't heard him cast his opinion, like I've said before. So I think the government is possibly getting intel that is making people realise that being anti-Ukraine is not useful for the US's national interests. There's no pushback from Biden asking for more aid to Ukraine, from Trump. So that's interesting. We haven't heard Trump any official line on the $24 billion that Biden's asked for. No pushback on that. So that might happen. Trump's pick for Ukraine Russian envoy is pushing for more aid to Ukraine. So that is Keith Kellogg. Trump has told about the long-range missile strikes, no pushback. So this is true as well, supposedly, that when Biden wanted to lift restrictions on long-distance strikes into Russia, Trump didn't. He apparently asked Trump or told Trump, and there's no pushback from Trump, which is, again, good news. No pushback on the 20 billion of the 50 billion to Ukraine from the Russian money. So that's frozen Russian assets being underwriting loans to Ukraine. No pushback there, apparently. More official aides are being more and more pro-Ukraine on the news. So it's in the information space, like Fox News, you're starting to get people who are arguing for Ukraine. I think Trump is getting the intel briefings and being told the truth now about Ukraine and is pivoting. This is so important. This has been my hope. Like I said, there are two options. One option is that Trump helps Ukraine because he then becomes a savior and it's all about him, and it's not so much he's helping Ukraine for the right reasons, he's helping Ukraine for the wrong reasons, which is self-aggrandizing, but who cares, it's the right result. That was one option that I could foresee happening, that meant that Ukraine would actually come out benefiting from a Trump administration. Second one is that basically he and his lackeys, and by lackeys I mean Elon Musk, David Sachs, his own frickin' son, Tucker Carlson, Donald Trump Jr. that is, Tucker Carlson, all these people that are splurging the information spaces with anti-Ukraine narrative, they're just ignorant. They are pig ignorant of what is going on. And now that they are getting the proper information, it could be that Trump and his team are going, oh, right, okay. Oh, I understand how it works now. Like you and I, I'm doing this literally 12 hours a day. Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump Jr. and Elon Musk are not sitting 12 hours a day learning about what's going on in Ukraine and learning how it all fits into the geopolitics of the region and of the world. And so there will be a deep ignorance. And I mean that, like, not even as a pejorative. They just don't know. They just, like, I'm not calling them stupid or anything. They just haven't taken the time. And part of that will be because they don't want to. And I think someone like Tucker Carlson might well be compromised. I think Elon Musk might well be compromised. So there are other elements going on there. But some of them will just be sucked into that information space and that ecosystem. And they get pulled along. Oh, thank you so much, Owen. Look at my Ukraine mug as well. They get sucked into that worldview where they just don't challenge things, and they want to believe that Ukraine is corrupt and Ukraine are the bad guys, etc., etc. Well, actually, reality hopefully can come home to roost here, and it could be a pivot that's taking place. And if that's the case, things can be very different. What annoys me is that up to now, these people have been willfully ignorant. Like, they haven't tried to find out. And so I think that's deeply, deeply irresponsible of Trump. Trump may end up doing the right things and saying the right things eventually. But that 6 months, year, 2 years, 4 years leading to that has been deeply irresponsible and damaging for Ukraine. That 7 months of not getting aid to Ukraine killed people. And that, the responsibility of that lies with Trump. So we can end up doing the right thing, but the way there has been dangerous and annoying. And all those people around him have been willfully ignorant, not seeking to find out the truth from people who know. Like going to someone like Keith Kellogg and saying, actually, teach me about Ukraine. Teach me about the military situation in the region and the geopolitical situation. Instead, they go to someone like David Sachs or Elon Musk. Yeah, tell me about. Oh, right, okay, and that does the damage. Anyway, sorry, massive digression there, but it's really important because we might end up seeing a lot more help from the US than we were expecting. Okay, to stay on Norway. Norway has agreed to bear half the responsibility of protecting the main transit hub for foreign military aid to Ukraine, according to Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk. I talked about this yesterday a little bit, that actually you might see Europe starting to get the wheels turning for doing a lot more of the heavy lifting in line with what Trump and the MAGA Republicans want, which is, oh, Europe aren't paying enough, you're not doing enough, you need to do more. Like I said before, the more Europe does, the more independent it becomes from the US, and actually the less influence the US can have on Europe going forward. So this might come at a cost to America in terms of power and decision making, but it is those MAGA Republicans that advocate for isolationism, they would say that this is a good thing because Europe is paying more. Now, South Korea has refused to sell weapons, as I said yesterday, to Ukraine, according to SBS. Ukraine sought to purchase Chongyung anti-aircraft systems, missile defense, and counter-battery radars. The delegation emphasized buying, not free supply, but all the proposals were declined. And the reason was given that Ukraine was involved as a warring nation in a conflict, and therefore it was against the constitution to be able to do that, etc., etc. This has caused a lot of ruckus, and there's been a lot of anger from in Ukraine, I think. Now, Ukraine's defense minister wasn't quite sent away empty-handed from Seoul. After the humiliation, and I understand, says Tim White, there is real fury in the president's office, Rustem Umerov was given $100 million by South Korea in support of the social sphere. So this is like South Korea feeling a bit bad about not selling any weaponry to Ukraine and saying, well, here's $100 million to go and spend it on sweets or whatever. That's at least that's something, but really Ukraine needed an awful lot of South Korean equipment. Now, Japan has provided Ukraine with $235 million in concessional funding for 2 World Bank projects, the Rise and Learn projects. These initiatives aim to strengthen entrepreneurship and enhance education resilience during the war. Now, I don't know if this is previously announced funding, because there's the World Bank and the IMF, lots of funding goes there, and then it can be broken up into constituent parts, and then you kind of announce the same thing just in different ways. So it could be that, but good news anyway. God damn, I need that cup of tea. Sitting here speaking for like 3 hours non-stop without moving my backside. Right, okay. German aid to Ukraine sent me this message. I thought I'd go through that. Not so much about North Korean soldiers there. Basically, Christian Freuding, the German chappie, came out and said some things pertaining to North Korea, Korean soldiers and equipment and other things. But also there was the announcement that the Dutch had given those launchers Patriot launchers to Ukraine yesterday, and he's just clarifying that. So thank you, German aid, you're a legend. Regarding the Dutch equipment, that's the parts, the 3 launchers and 1 radar the Dutch pledged months ago when they wanted to assemble a full Patriot fire unit for Ukraine, if you remember that. I do indeed. So if you remember the Dutch, and I to be honest, I knew this would be those, but I didn't say it. So if you remember way back when, it was when Ukraine was saying we desperately need air defense, and then the Germans set up their project to get the IAADS, was it, to get loads of basically Patriot systems, ideally, but loads of air defense for Ukraine, and they did. They got a bunch of stuff. It didn't quite get as much as they were wanting. There was a SAMP-T from Italy, a bunch of Patriots, and then the Netherlands were hoping to give some parts of Patriot systems, and then get other nations to give other parts from their systems, and together you could give an entire battery to Ukraine. And that was a good idea. Netherlands went, so we're going to give these parts, but then everyone else went, no, not so much. And then there was just the radar and three launchers. Well, that's what's now been delivered. So it didn't get turned into a full battery, but at least it will be useful. You can plug and play those into the system. Anyway, in September, the Dutch MOD said nobody is willing to help out with the parts, so they can't assemble one. They're now delivering all the parts to Ukraine separately for them to be integrated into existing fire units. In September, they'd already delivered a radar, and now apparently delivery of 3 pledged launchers took place. So in total, the Dutch have now delivered 1 Patriot radar and 5 Patriot launchers, because they previously delivered 2 launchers to Ukraine, along with a few missiles, thanks to German aid. Now, I was talking about how the German Patriot systems are, I think, advantageous for the Ukrainians compared to the American ones. I mean, they're all American, but the way the Germans configure them is slightly different. And someone on my threads was like, that's a load of rubbish. They're all the same. They all come on these trailers. I said, no, the Germans actually have them on a truck directly, and that allows them to shoot and scoot. It's rather like a glorified HIMARS. It's a bit more, yeah, it's not quite as mobile as a system as a HIMARS, but they are truck mounted. So I just wanted to explain that to you guys. So here's Patrick Tomlinson talking about this thing. So because the German Patriot system is mounted on trucks instead of trailers, as the American system is, that makes the system far more mobile and reduces setup and teardown times, making shoot and scoot possible before the enemy can locate and retaliate. A lesson for US forces there. And I'd agree with this. So this is, you know, I think we've seen this being used by the Ukrainians, where they've used the German mounted ones to get close to the front lines, use them. And in fact, they lost a couple of launchers doing that. And they load them on these, I think, these manned trucks in order to be able to do shoot and scoot. So Military News UA here says, it's interesting that the German battery of Patriot air defense systems in service of the armed forces of Ukraine is probably the most successful system for shooting down the Russian helicopters and planes. So far, this battery is shot down, and it lists a whole bunch of stuff. And this is going back to February this year. But yeah, it is different to the American system in its mobility. Right, moving on. The Ukrainian companies Court, Elf Systems and Sky Assist and MPS Development and the Finnish Summa Defence have established a joint venture company in Finland for the production of drones. Work at the new facility in Finland is starting the first half of 2025. Initially, the facility will produce aerial reconnaissance drones, which are to be followed by ground and sea drones in the future. Now, this goes back to this idea that there are loads of things that are happening that will effectively support Ukraine that are in the pipeline. And if Ukraine are forced to a negotiation, then you might have a situation whereby they can't take advantage of all the things that are going to be coming online in 2025. There is also the idea we mustn't get sucked in by Trump's rhetoric, which is, we'll sort this out, it'll be solved within a day, and that'll actually be before the inauguration. That's not going to happen. It won't happen. I think that's deeply irresponsible, because people voted on the fact that Trump was going to get peace. He might end up getting peace, but not in a way that he promised at all, right? And yeah, and it might have been when peace was going to happen kind of anyway, given the direction of where the war is going. Anyway, whatever. But to lie and say we can get it sorted in a day, I think is deeply, deeply irresponsible. So if they do go to negotiations forced by the Americans in a way that the Kellogg Flights plan has stipulated, then actually that's not going to be a day. You know, it's not like they're going to go to the table and, all right, everyone stop what you're doing, and suddenly everyone just puts their guns down and goes and drinks tea with each other. Likelihood is that this will take months and months and months to sort out, and there'll still be fighting going on, and that will be part of the negotiating. You know, the first part of the negotiations is taking place now on the battlefield, and that will continue during negotiations. That will change things. It won't just be as simple as downing sticks and stopping while negotiations are taking place. Ukrainian ground drone here with a bunch of installed drone jammers. I mean, goodness me, that is some serious drone jamming equipment. Wow. I presume this is a bit of a joke. Yeah, they're just throwing these drones onto the floor from behind. But it is a bit of a joke. But, you know, hopefully it can bring down drones. Be interesting. I'd be really interested to see, obviously this is a joke, but actually to have drones flying there, like 5 drones just hovering, and see, like, if you switch this on, what effect that would actually have. Now, I've shown you this previously, or shown you one very similar to this. There's a lot of talk about the Americans putting pressure on the Ukrainians to get more young men mobilized. An important point by Oliver Carroll, says Mick Ryan, the retired Australian general. The point isn't understood enough. Ukraine is fighting a war for its existence, so society is very sensitive to losing its youngest generation. However, good fighters they make. 18 to 25 already the segment where the country's most vulnerable. The birth rate plummeted in the early 2000s. So the problem, and they would know this, right? So part of their rationale is going to be, you know, before we look at any demographic evidence, we do want to protect this age group because, you know, they're most likely to have children. They're most likely to, you know, that's when they're getting educated, when they're getting vocationally trained. And if we want to safeguard the country going forward, we need to make sure that we're keeping that knowledge and we're skilling our people up and we've got a future. If we just completely rip out that cohort, those generations, and send them to their deaths, then we're going to be left with a very top-heavy demographic setup. Well, actually, it's even worse than that because it's already top-heavy, right? There's already a huge lack of young people of that age. Now, that might be due to people fleeing the country as well as a low birth rate, but the situation is that you have the least ability to take from that age group. And therefore that's why, you know, they're focusing on, you know, your 25 to 45 group there, because that's where it's bulging for the males, and maybe they need, you know, some babushkas from the female side up here. But yeah, so there are lots of arguments for and against changing the mobilization to include that age group, but remember that it, you know, you've got issues with the sheer number of people in that age group. Now, we have had Boris Johnson talking about how he was interviewed on Ukraine the Latest, about how troops should defend Ukraine's border as part of any peace deal. This is going forward a little bit. I'm not going to play it to you. You can go and check it out. But the idea is that all European nations should be open to, I think, their troops inside Ukraine as part of any kind of peace deal. Not necessarily now, before the peace deal, although I would advocate doing that in the West myself, but yeah, that's my position. Right, Chris Owicki has a thread here on police and vigilante groups in Russian regions reportedly sweeping up young people, migrants and seasonal revelers to induce them to sign military contracts in an attempt to address the huge shortfalls in the number of those willing to go to war in Ukraine. So according to the Telegram channel that he refers to a lot, in the region's military registration and enlistment office, employees together with law enforcement officers and public associations, police helpers, Cossacks, where this is practiced, have begun to conduct illegal quarterly raids in search of volunteers, scare quotes, volunteers for the front. Sources explain that this is by the fact that each region, down to each district in a particular city, has a plan for the number of contracts, and in many places there is a huge shortfall. Therefore, the bright minds have come up with a solution not to formalise the events in any way, and not even to check against the database for eligibility, but to immediately send employees out into the field to visit 100% of the residential buildings. It works like this. A military registration and enlistment office, employee and civilian security officers knock on every apartment and inquire about the men living there. To adequate and literate residents, they explain their visit as educational activities like agitation and nothing more. But the main focus is on young people, migrants, and most importantly those who will be on a bender on New Year's Eve and during the holiday break. Potential volunteers will be led to sign a contract under various pretexts, taking advantage of their high spirits and the hustle and bustle around them. The report illustrates another aspect of Russia's crypto mobilization, which is taking place in lieu of actual fresh mobilization that would be politically difficult for the Russian government. Notably, it's taking place in the regions rather than Moscow or St. Petersburg. It also highlights what appears to be a previously unreported role for police helpers, the Voluntary People's Druzhina, a Soviet-era institution revived under Putin. The Druzhinas are roughly translatable as neighborhood guards. Voluntarily help the police to maintain order. Although the Druzhinas were discontinued with the fall of the Soviet Union, they were revived and extended nationwide under a 2014 decree from Putin. In some regions, Cossack squads for the protection of public order perform similar functions. So that is interesting, I think, reflective of the problems Russia has with mobilization. I mean, we're well aware of them. and their utter distaste, I guess, at the moment for a mass mobilization, because it would be political and economic suicide. They're in a bind, the Russians. They desperately need troops. How do they get them without doing a mass mobilization? Stuff like this, collecting up those in society that the rest of the society cares less about. So people in prison, homeless people, they'll be no doubt going down all of these routes, trying to get as many people as possible. And then immigrants, illegal and legal, try and fix them into contracts, fool them into contracts. And then, of course, North Korea and kind of mercenaries from outside. Speaking of North Korea, and I don't know if this was a last-minute thing decided because Rustem Umerov went to South Korea, that now Borisov, the Russian defense minister, has gone to North Korea. Here, Tim White says, how uncomfortable does Borisov look as he surveys the meat exports? Well, you got to remember, this guy is not a military guy either. He's in charge of the MOD, but he's an economics man. But anyway, he's going to North Korea to, I presume, try and get as much stuff for the war effort as possible. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use. Thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.